if the internet's going down, can your application still function? That's the problem we're typically dealing with, is network connectivity problems, and then still needing to function and operate. Like a retailer, if their point of sale goes down and it's fully dependent on the cloud, they're in a world of hurt during that, even if it's an hour or 2 hours.
Welcome to LaunchPod AI, the show from LogRocket, where top product and digital leaders share real-world ways they're using AI to move faster and work smarter. Today's episode is a little different. We're talking about how AI isn't just something you call from the cloud anymore. It's moving to the edge. And if you're not thinking about where your models run, you're already behind. We're joined by Joel Polanco, Senior Hardware Product Manager at Intel's Edge Computing Group. He's led dozens of enterprise AI edge deployments and knows exactly what it takes to run AI models locally and at scale. In this episode, we discuss why AI at the edge will cause a whole new wave of disruption across multiple industries, why moving AI to the edge slashes costs and levels up customer experience, and real-world examples of edge AI deployments Joel has seen, from IT assistants to agents that restock store shelves from a single photo. So here's our episode with Joel Polanco from Intel. Joel, welcome to the show, man. You've been a writer for us on the product blog for quite a while, but great to get you on the LaunchPod here. I think this could be one that people want to listen to because everyone knows about AI. It's the talk of every product leader I sit down with, every product leader I talk to. But there's a whole world that is developing here that I think people are not paying enough attention to. And that's an area you have a deep specialty in. And that is as AI is kind of proliferating out of the cloud and maybe out of some of these on-prem models that people are hearing about, but out to the edge where it's actually running on kind of devices out in the world. It's probably an area that AI is going to keep developing in. So welcome to the show, man. Let's talk a little AI at the edge.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for having me on. I really am a big fan of LogRocket and you all, and I'm so happy to be on the podcast here today. So a little bit about the edge, I'll start with a little fun fact. So a lot of folks don't know this, but the iPhone has had what's called a NPU, a neural processing unit in it, since the iPhone X. And that processor, it's like a coprocessor. It's been sitting on that board for a long time. And so Apple has been thinking about this a long time. A lot of tech companies have been thinking about this a long time and have been slowly adding capabilities to their devices. And kind of what you're seeing now is the proliferation of what are called AI PCs, this idea that your laptop, your desktop, the ones we use every day, also have these neural processing units and other AI capabilities built in. So you can actually run AI models locally. And that's what, edge AI and edge computing is all about.
To dumb it down maybe a little more for someone like me, is this kind of like where I remember, if we all remember back in the day, you had Siri on the iPhone, but if you were, in airplane mode or somehow not, didn't have a good enough signal, it wouldn't work. Now it works no matter what because it actually runs on the phone. Basically same idea, but AI models.
Exactly. Yeah. So in that instance, you're right. You're, with Siri, the original instantiation, you're talking to Siri, but what was happening was you're doing an API call to the cloud, through the network. And then that response was then being sent back down to you. And now, to your point, these models have gotten so good, with DeepSeek coming out of China and some other open models that have just been released by OpenAI. They've shrunk them down to be able to fit on these devices, and they still perform pretty well. Maybe not as well as the big ones that you see in the cloud, but yes, you can run them now locally.
I guess to just jump right into it here, what does this mean or why is this important? You're doing implementations now, so where is this impacting?
Yeah, it's impacting a number of industries, and it's going to take time because what happens is first you start in the cloud. Why do you do that? It's first off, you don't have to manage your infrastructure. You can rent your servers, you can basically rent the compute, and then you can deploy quickly. But what happens over time is eventually that gets expensive, especially as your usage grows. And so then companies will begin to optimize their spend and bring that compute and those capabilities, locally in a place where they can manage the cost much more efficiently and optimize it. So some places you start to see that now. For one, it's I'm in the retail space. We're starting to see retailers experiment with conversational AI agents, doing different tasks. One use case would be as an IT agent helping their employees resolve printing issues or, point of sale issues. Another use case is like, hey, this agent is here to help you with like inventory. So you can take a picture of a shelf, send it to the agent, and then it'll come back and tell you with hey, your order is confirmed. Go and restock this area of the shelf with so much product. Those models were originally deployed in the cloud with the retailers. They're now looking at how can I bring this on-prem, this capability, so that I can save cost on my API calls. I can basically, but I have to manage it now, which is a trade-off, right?
The thinking here, like, are they making this transition for cost? Is it like accounting? Because I'm assuming if you're running, the cloud models, you're running, some OpEx cost there. If you are hosting it and you're paying more device than anything else, that's probably a CapEx expense and you can amortize it. Is that how they're looking at it? Or is this more of a speed, or is there just a different cost where you kind of understand you pay for the device once and you're just running it over time versus having to pay kind of monthly fees that are beholden to whatever the API cost is?
Yeah, though I think what happens is first you deploy to the cloud and then you validate the use case. Hey, this use case is working, usage is increasing. I have product market fit, so to speak, for this, particular use case. My employees like it, they're using it. Once that usage starts to grow, then this cost is not going to be sustainable for me if I scale to thousands of locations. So now I'm looking at like, okay, yes, I do want to implement a different architecture. I'll look at on-prem, which the trade-off is then, like you said, hey, it's that higher initial CapEx because now you got to put hardware in your store to run that capability. But there's a point where, it transitions where the costs get too high for cloud. So now you're going to bring them down by implementing on-prem, but you get some lumpy spend in there because of the CapEx cost.
And just real quick, if you are listening from the cloud or on your phone and you're liking this conversation so far and you want more of this kind of stuff, go into your Apple podcast, go into your Spotify, whatever you're using, hit the subscribe button, leave us a review, please. If you're on YouTube, give us a subscribe, follow us, make sure you leave a nice comment. If you like this and you find it interesting and you're learning, tell a colleague, tell a friend, tell them it's great. Help us keep doing more of this, keep bringing this great AI content from people like Joel. All right, Joel, appreciate the patience on that. Let's jump back in because I guess you've clearly seen a lot of this. So maybe let's just kind of like take the 10-second explainer. Why are you the guy to come talk about this right now? Like, what are you doing out in the field that is giving you these insights?
Yeah, I work with some great teams over at Intel in the edge computing group. And our reason for existence is identifying problems that our customers and their customers are having with, deployment of compute or processing, new applications or trying to implement new solutions in industries primarily. So, Intel is largely known for serving like laptop and desktop and server markets. Our edge computing group is focused on those same processors, but applying them into locations like retail stores or manufacturing facilities or warehouses and distribution centers, because there's a whole slew of industry-based use cases that require these sorts of capabilities.
Yeah. So you're out in the field helping kind of understand what these end user customers need and what the use cases are that they're deploying these kind of edge executions of AI models for.
Exactly. And that's how we look at it. It's like maybe a little bit more unique than some other places in AI, where we're not only looking at the application of the models, but we're also looking at what are the nuts and bolts of those models and how can we optimize them to run on our processors and which ones are more conducive for our processors and which ones are not, because obviously like customers are going to want choice and we're not always going to be a great fit for every solution. So we do our best to position ourselves with those particular use cases where we can offer like a cost advantage or a latency advantage or like a long-term advantage of some kind.
Yeah. I think this is an important thing that maybe a lot of people who are a little earlier in their AI kind of journey maybe haven't seen yet, but it's very easy to look at. You tried some little AI thing that you built internally or some kind of internal tool, and it's pretty cheap. I mean, like, if you're looking at analyzing text with OpenAI, you're going to have a hard time running up a bill more than, a couple $dozen a month. But as you start to do more and more, as you said, it's one thing to do one store or like one small set of users. But if you are some enormous retail chain and you're trying to deploy something so that every staff member on your team out in the stores has a device that's running these models, that's going to be tens of thousands of people potentially. You're going to really quickly, a couple dozen dollars a month per person adds up when it's 10,000, 20,000 people. So this is something, as people kind of mature on their AI journey, probably good ways to think about their own, how are they baking it into their products? How are they deploying both internal and external applications is, thinking about, maybe it's not the same apples to apples, but how do you think about cost? How do you think about the unit cost of some of these models? How do you look to reduce and, pick the right model and the right unit economics at work to deliver these things? So I see a lot of parallels to what you're doing out there and how people probably should be thinking about it in their own product journey.
Absolutely. Like if I could add on that for a sec, yeah, like there are examples where, you can have a much better customer experience if you account for internet going down. If the internet's going down, can your application still function? Because if you're totally reliant and your application goes down, you don't have some sort of, local on-prem sort of processing or local on device, that could impact your usage, your users' just experience with the application, right? And so that's how we look at things, because that's the problem we're typically dealing with is, network connectivity problems, and then still needing to function and operate like a retailer. If their point of sale goes down and it's fully dependent on the cloud, they're in a world of hurt during that, even if it's an hour or 2 hours. And so, we're working with solution providers that have lots of experience in dealing with that sort of situation.
Probably less vital use case here, but I know there's this one application I use on my phone that is all about, using AI to identify plants. And I have a place up in the mountains that we go with my family. And one of the things the kids like to do is understand, like, what's that? What's this? And using that app to identify the plants and make sure we have kind of the right thing is fantastic. The problem is it's a bit remote and cell service is basically zero. So I can't go more than like 20 feet from our actual house.
Yeah.
Before my internet dies. And I can't, so the app is useless. So I haven't paid for the pay thing because the biggest use case I have for it, I can't use it for. If they were running the model locally, and I know we're probably not there yet with like the visual models, but if they could get to that point, I'd shell out a bunch of money for that thing.
Yeah, exactly. To your point, visual models do consume a lot more data because of the nature, of the pictures having, large file sizes, but those models are just getting better. And so, and there's more and more memory and more compute being added on these devices. One thing that the trend has been, a lot of people don't realize is, of the S&P 500, of the top 10 companies, 7 of them are all now chip designers or chip vendors, so
that's
Apple's
wild.
designing, Microsoft's designing, they're all designing their own chips. Why are they doing that? They see this as a strategic, important, imperative for them to be successful long-term.
Well, so the other thing to get into here is, I think the most common kind of objection I've heard to companies' adoption of AI, whether it be in their own product or whether it be internally for their teams to use, has also been security. And I know we have a couple kind of Skunksworks projects internally even that we're looking at that we're trying to, we kind of need the models to catch up to some things we want to do. But, when you have the sensitivity like that, if you can run the model on your own infrastructure, that's a lot lower hurdle to clear than sending your data to any of the big providers, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, no matter what you sign, you can sign any kind of NDA, secrecy, any piece of paper you want. But in the end, I think it goes back to, right, there's some saying like a secret's only a secret until you tell someone. Once, as soon as you add any dependencies external, your risk profile went way, way up. So do you see companies kind of bring this in for that? Maybe it's less in retail for that, but like kind of across maybe other disciplines?
Yeah, there's 2 reasons. Well, I'll give 3: security and then privacy. And then the third one is your unique data. And so that ties to security, but your unique data set, being able to leverage that confidently to enhance those foundational models is huge. It's got a huge competitive advantage for companies like your own, right? You have your own unique data set that you can leverage. And then that, hey, if these open models are available, then you can augment them with your own data and improve upon their outputs, right? The other thing here is, I think what's happening is like with OpenAI, recently releasing their open models, I was kind of like thinking about some like two sides to it. Well, one is, why would you do that? Your proprietary, you're trying to drive monetization of your proprietary models, which are very good, but you have to think that part of the reason that they opened up some of those models is to just drive more usage, kind of raise all the boats. And they know that they'll have like like essentially a 2-tier model, right? Your freemium kind of open models available. And then on top of that, paid versions of like the God models, the big models, which then they can drive. They're going to continue to improve and people will pay for those, right?
Yeah. Also, I mean, over time, what I've seen is generally any kind of open source, self-hosted thing like that, you're going to get a lot of, noise around it too. But there's only so many people that are really going to run like production workloads and host all their own infrastructure for it. And all the kind of stuff you have it's a lot more than just calling an API at that point. You need a lot more capability. Some people are going to do it, and the people who are going to do it probably need it. But like, I would wager the cannibalization of cloud spend on that might be a little bit lower than people think, because it's just hard to run those things in a high fidelity way. Like you need an operations team that knows what they're doing to run highly performant applications and infrastructure on top of then running your own application.
Yeah, exactly. And I've kind of seen this like before with Edge, with Edge in a prior version was the IoT, so Internet of Things. And we had the same sorts of things, challenges where, for certain workloads, people were going to send their data to the cloud, have it processed, and then send results back. A lot of times that was like, basically the idea of IoT was you had these sensors, they were sound or video or RFID, for instance. That data would get sent. You have a use case like inventory management. The data gets sent to the cloud, is constantly processed there and brought back. In the case of IoT, there's a number of instances where you needed to keep that data locally and you needed it processed, and it needed to be like, processed very quickly and turned around so you can actually take action on it. And one of those use cases was like loss prevention, for instance. If you invested in these RFID tags on all of your inventory, then if someone was stealing something, you need to know immediately when they leave the door, and that alert would come back. And so kind of what happened over time was initial implementations were like mobile devices scanning and then sending the data to the cloud. Later on, additional use cases got added where they'd like add gates at the door, and then the tags could be, checked at the door, and then you have an alert happen locally. And so depending on your strategy and depending on what problems you're trying to solve, those will be the drivers as to how you architect your edge AI implementation. And, you're going to look at that ROI on it, right? What am I going to get for this use case? And why should I be spending this much CapEx? In a lot of cases, it makes sense. In some cases, it just doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, even if you think about, back to retail on your end, and this is totally hypothesizing here, but a lot of cases you're talking to clerks, you're talking to people kind of helping make recommendations, or I don't know, at least I am often. I'm like, hey, what maybe goes with this, or what are some ideas here when, clothing retail, that is, or, at like Home Depot, hey, how do I kind of do XYZ? There's a ton of retail options here. And having that conversation, like the human layer, when it's, someone like you and me, you go back and forth very naturally. I've used a lot of the voice layer of OpenAI, and it's great. I love talking to it. It's, handy to do sometimes when you can't type, but there's that lag that is really noticeable. It's fine in that case, because I know what I'm doing. I know I'm not talking to a human, but like in a retail environment, I could imagine similarly where e-commerce, right? Every like millisecond of delay in loading a page causes degradation and conversion. Do you start to see something where people aren't interacting with it as human-like and not, maybe not purchasing or taking recommendations as much if they have some kind of agent on the floor helping people with that, because that delay makes it seem less human and less kind of relatable, versus you can make it seem more relatable if the back and forth time isn't to call out to the cloud and come back, it's just locally run.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're not totally dependent. And that latency is huge for both the customer service use case and then the AI enabled checkout. So we've seen self-checkout kind of grow over time. A lot of that is really effectively the shopper scanning, their own things on the way out. But there are some examples of AI enabled checkout where the full process is handled by the point of sale. That's largely happening in smaller footprint places like convenience stores. Like here in Phoenix, where I'm at, there's a full deployment in one of the local chains at Circle K of these AI-enabled checkout through Mashgin. And basically, you just put your stuff down, it sees everything, the camera sees everything you put on the platform, and it just inputs those pictures and translates them into a barcode, right?
Wow.
And that data gets sent and put on the screen for you. And going back to your point of around this like idea of like human latency, the big problem convenience stores have is when the line gets too long, they receive a lot more drops than say like other retail environments. Someone went into a convenience store because it is literally a convenience store. If I have to wait even more than 30 seconds in line, I might consider just leaving because I got to go. And so these new checkouts that have been added have been really helpful. And what ends up happening is you still have like, the normal checkout next to them. And then these other checkouts are available for people just to get in and out really quickly.
Yeah, if you can kind of not infinitely scale checkout, but you can, somewhat scale up and down as you need without having to kind of step function the human cost. That's helpful. And like, we have self-checkout now, but you gotta scan things one by one. There's always some kind of error in the barcode won't read, or like, oh, it read, but it threw an error, and now you have to wait 10 minutes for a clerk to come over. I'm just impatient, unfortunately.
Like we all are nowadays, right? It's just growing. Our expectations, just continue to go up and up with all these things.
The Google effect is real, man. It affects real life, not just online now. I mean, I guess we gotta keep up. I do have a question. I understand this at the edge piece. Is a binary? Is it just like you're either running it like on your local device, kind of handheld, or in the cloud, or are there other pieces? Like, how should people think about this from an actual implementation standpoint?
Yeah, it's definitely hybrid. Like there's some cases where everything ends up running at the edge because you have to, but a lot of the cases are you have a mix and match approach. And I'll give you like one example where in retail, we have traditional point of sale or, your kind of your everyday self-checkout where the user's scanning. What has been the result of self-checkout growing over time has just basically been more and more loss or shrinkage. That's a trade-off the retailers make, which is, hey, I'm getting, efficiencies on labor savings and customer satisfaction. But as a result, some small percentage of the shoppers are taking advantage of that and they're not really shopping, right? They're stealing. So, the loss prevention use cases come in where like cameras are added and then some processing will happen locally, like on an edge server or in an edge computer. And it doesn't necessarily happen on that point of sale, but it's happening locally on the computer. But then simultaneously, that computer, that point of sale, it may be processing both locally and in the cloud. And because they do that to have redundancy. So they can make sure that if the network goes down, processing can continue to happen. But if that network goes down, they can't actually process the credit card transactions instantly. And so what they end up doing is like batching them and then they'll send them all off once the network comes up in like, in 5 minutes or whatever. And so the same thing happens with AI where, depending on what you're doing, you may be better off running your model in the cloud, say like, for instance, you're analyzing all the shopping baskets that got processed in the last like 3 hours. That's a bigger, processing. That's a larger amount of data. That's going to process in the cloud. And then that might come back with like a coupon recommendation or like an inventory stocking algorithm or some sort of smart detection of what's going on in that big batch of data that you just sent up to then go send back to the store manager to say, here's how you can go optimize this process.
Makes sense. So we've kind of gone through the theory, right? Let's get to the fun part. I mean, you're in the field doing this. You are talking to, big companies, helping them actually lay the groundwork and understand what they, need to do here. What are some of the, and maybe you can't use names in all of these, and that's fine, understand that. But what are some of the coolest things you've seen people doing? Like, what are some really neat implementations you've either heard about and, via maybe team members or that you've been a part of and seen kind of some really kick-ass things here?
I really like the growth in conversational AI right now. So a couple of things we're working on was one large retailer implemented in North America, a couple of conversational AI agents for their employees. And one of the agents was helping with IT issues. The other one was helping with like inventory and stocking. And they originally implement them in the cloud. So the employees all have like a mobile device that they're using in the store. They would interact with that mobile device. It's like basically looks like a phone or a large phone. They would query it, and then that sends the query up to the cloud to the models to run, and then they get a result back. Essentially, the usage was growing to a point where they're like, hey, this is going to become very expensive pretty quick. So they call us to work with them on, their edge architecture. Hey, we want to look at here's everything we have implemented in the store. Here's all the compute we're using. How can we better use this? Is there a way we can leverage existing compute to load these models on? Can these models actually run on something we already bought and paid for, or do we have to go buy new hardware? And typically the answer is you do have to buy new hardware, but a lot of these models have shrunken down where you don't need to go out and buy massive servers. That's just not the case anymore.
Yeah, I mean, so the probably infrastructure cost is not that huge, but you're going to save a giant amount on a monthly bill. So the IT assistant one kind of makes sense, right? But on the inventory side, how are companies using this for inventory management in a kind of chat function?
Yeah, it's a natural interface. It's a lot of people are talking about this as being our interface, in the future for a lot of things, right? Even email. Is this a time even email gets reimagined? Same case here where, you historically may have had some in inventory application. It required you to fill out text boxes and fill in fields and then do some things. And then you hit send and then it would do something in the cloud, come back and give you some information okay, just ordered, 7 more bottles of shampoo. Okay, now, go to the back and pick them up and then it sends a restocking. Well, imagine that interface changing where it's just a chat agent, it's just another person and hey, you go up to the aisle and you take a picture and it sees a blank section of this aisle and it knows this shampoo is out. It sends immediately the picture. It knows it takes the context, the situational awareness to then go and fill out all those fields and text boxes and hit send for you. All you really did was just send a picture.
Yeah. So basically, if you're if you are a large grocery company and you have, people out on the floor and part of their function is to make sure the shelves have all the SKUs there, they can, rather than having to kind of look and notate and manually pick apart every single SKU and see what needs to be brought back in, can kind of just snap a quick picture of that shelf, like you said. Someone, maybe a picker in the back, can assemble the pallet and you just bring it out and start to greatly speed up the kind of person cost of that kind of stuff. Is that understanding it right? Or
yeah, exactly. And you can optimize your operations and your workflow all around that particular, inventory restocking use case and ordering, because maybe that workflow was 3 separate processes before.
Right.
Now you have a chance to re-architect the business and those workflows. Maybe you condense them into one, or you streamline it down from 10 steps down to 5 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all because you just have this new interface to work with, which is getting everyone's creativity going, as well as just delivering a whole new set of capabilities where potentially maybe even one day you create an AI agent, right? That can do some of these things that were manual before, right?
Any models you've seen where maybe someone thought one thing and then, as you kind of were going through, that's not really a great use case for this?
Yeah, a lot of those, right? Something that didn't work out. One of the things that one of the retailers found was it was actually more efficient to have employees that were already doing stocking to be doing the inventory scanning with their handheld mobile device as they were restocking. And so it was kind of this ongoing process of we can run the robot down the aisles every couple of hours. But the reality was they already had so many associates going around. Yeah. All you needed to do was have them take pictures as they saw things. You just had to change a business process. And then I've seen other cases where I know there's some companies that are working on devices where employees can actually wear cameras, kind of like police officers wear the cameras. Yeah. Now they're looking at use cases where people are wearing the cameras, but then those things can also do inferencing and run other models. So those are some experimental things that are happening.
Interesting. And then does agentic get into this at all? Agents have been a big talk amongst people in the SaaS world for a little bit now, and some of those are really coming to fruition. Is this something that we're going to see at the edge anytime soon, or is it kind of too compute intensive and maybe just we're farther away from that and that's not something that's been thought about a lot yet?
Cisco actually, and I posted this morning on LinkedIn, in their
Mhm.
latest investor presentation, they posted what they expect to happen to the network as agentic AI starts growing.
Mhm.
And you just see this huge spike in applications running. And why is that? Well, when I think about agentic AI, it's like now an agent is essentially a software application. It's a software
Yeah.
application that you've developed. It could be, a very small one. It's doing a specific task or solving a specific problem. The AI is helping identify when that agent should run under certain conditions, and you're training that over time. And so you can imagine just the amount of little tasks that are out there
Yeah.
that could be automated if you had the right interface, if you had the right tools to put them in the hands of users to build on their own, like in a no code kind of way. What we see is that, yeah, this space is definitely going to grow. And then at the edge, you're going to see some of that proliferate, but it's going to happen in the cloud first. It's going to happen in the cloud first, and then it'll proliferate down. And some of these cases that I'm talking about will start happening. You'll have more automated ways of detecting, inventory shortage or
Mhm.
other things happening in a on-prem, in a retail store that you can inference from the cameras that you have, from other sensors that you have, and those applications can run automatically. But it's going to take time because, there's going to be a human in the loop for some time before you can validate that the use case is really working the way you
Mhm.
want. But I believe this is going to result in a huge compute refresh. There's going to be a big network memory and compute refresh, both in the cloud and the edge as a result. And not even on the AI, it's just on your existing compute,
Right.
because it's just there's going to be more applications running. You're going to need more horsepower, basically.
One last thing I wanted to get to is, we've talked a lot about kind of AI and implementation and how people should be thinking about maybe the future here of AI and running these models kind of more locally. That said, one thing that our listeners are always interested in too is like, how are you as a product professional using AI? But one thing we talked about kind of before the show is you have this cool use case where you're using chatbots to actually kind of simulate and train for those conversations before you go into them. Can you maybe just give us like the quick and dirty version of like what that looks like and how are you using it in that case? Because that sounded really cool.
Yeah. So, heading into some of these conversations with retailers or with solution providers, I always want to try to get like, build that empathy. Like, where are they going to come from? And so I'll do this in two ways. One is like, I'll use AI as a replacement for SEO. I'd always Google things, right? See what shows up on Google if I search like, cloud versus edge computing of this particular use case. What are the trade-offs? And then someone may have written a blog on it that'll pop up and I'll see like, hey, what would this customer have read ahead of time? Now I'm doing that with AI and trying to have a conversation as if, the AI is my customer or the user. What are the sorts of things that they're going to see when they input questions about, hey, like I'm a software architect, I'm an edge architect, I am looking at implementing this conversational AI bot. Should I implement it in the cloud or the edge? Give me all the pros and cons, and then give me a recommendation. And because I have to assume people are doing this. And so when I go in, what is it that the AI is actually recommending for them to do? So I have that kind of upfront. I know that. Then two is, hey, like based on your analysis here, give me all the potential objections that this particular customer might have. And it'll go scan like their public filings, their articles, their marketing, their, trade shows that they've been at. And then it'll highlight different key points and it gives you some insight into the customer's lens. And like when you go in to speak with them, you have all this context and you're hopefully trying to actually get to a point where you can help them solve their problem a little bit better from their perspective.
And if I remember right, you even said you're using some of that then to pass on to your team as well and help them kind of enable and be ready for those conversations, those interactions as well. Is that accurate?
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you try to give it over to them in just like easy to consume formats because a lot of them don't have time. They're running from, a lot of them from the sales team, they're
Yeah.
moving from customer to customer. They only have so much context. So, and whereas I have a deeper expertise in our particular area, I try to get that kind of summarized for them so that they have a package to bring in ahead of their conversation.
Love it. Real time kind of training that's based in, somewhat of a real life experiences there. So Joel, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for talking about this area of AI, which I think is inevitably coming to more and more industries, but maybe a lot of people haven't thought about it yet, but time to start noodling on it. If people want to reach out, is LinkedIn the best place to reach you, or is there a better spot?
No, absolutely. LinkedIn
Yeah.
is by far the best place to reach me. Don't hesitate to drop me a DM. I'm happy to connect and have conversation about this or product management or customer discovery. Love all those topics.
Awesome. Yeah. And, if you like Joel's information here, like I said, he also writes for the LogRocket blog. So check him out. He's got info at blog.logrocket.com as well as stories.logrocket.com. If you like the podcast and you want more of this kind of stuff, the biggest thing you can do, tell a colleague, pass on an episode, let them know that you learned a lot, that you enjoyed it, and that they should check it out. Thank you for joining us. Joel, huge thanks to you, man. I learned a ton here. I think everyone else who listens will as well. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.